Let's dive on into these players. 6 of them that could potentially win you your fantasy football leagues this year. 6 players with league-winning upside across running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. We're going to talk about those 3 positions in today's episode. Cameron, I'm going to have you kick us off here. Who is your first player that you want to talk about with league-winning upside this year?
It's DJ Moore, who's currently going off the board as the wide receiver in 19. You can get him in the 4th round. And in case you forgot last season, I want you to just paint you a picture of how bad this Bears offense was, especially from a passing perspective. They had the 5th least amount of pass attempts last season, 9th lowest completion percentage, 9th lowest yards per pass attempt, 5th lowest passing yards overall, and 10th lowest in passing touchdowns. They were bottom 10 in every major passing category. Yet, DJ Moore went out and put up 96 receptions on 136 targets for 1,364 yards and 8 touchdowns, good enough for the wide receiver 6 in PPR formats. He was also still top 15 in yards per route run and fantasy points per route run. So they had a terrible offense, and DJ Moore was still amazing. So this year, we've kind of changed it, right? Now everyone's got these high hopes for this offense as a whole. Now we bring in Caleb Williams, but we also bring in Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. And, you know, Shane Waldron's the new offensive coordinator, and we're not exactly over the moon about Shane Waldron being your offensive coordinator, right? It's not like, it's not like, oh, this is going to be world changing. But at the same time, last season, Shane Waldron threw the ball 60 more times for 700 more yards and 5 more touchdowns than this Bears offense did over in Seattle. Right? He's middle of the pack. But if the Bears get to middle of the pack in pass attempts, that is a huge upgrade for this offense as a whole compared to what they even saw last season. And I'm going to be honest, right? We've only seen a couple preseason games from Caleb Williams, but he is head and shoulders better than whatever the Bears were throwing out last season at the quarterback position. So yeah, there's going to be more competition on the field. But with a better passing attack that's just going to throw the ball more, where DJ Moore is clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense, DJ Moore is going to still have the same similar enough volume that he can finish, right up where he did last season. And like I said, last season, he was the wide receiver 6. If you were drafting him again in the 4th round and get a top 10 wide receiver, that is 100% league winning upside. And that's something that's a bet I want to take on DJ Moore. I've been taking it 9 out of 10 times in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, I think you named a lot of important points there about DJ Moore, especially the nature of this offense. Again, Shane Waldron, not a guy I'm super excited about. I'm just not a fan of his offense. And Cameron, I'm going to come back to you with another question on, we'll let Ty get his thoughts in here too. But how do you then reconcile the reality that the Bears signed Keenan Allen this offseason? Now he's, I might give you a gimme here and say, he's been looking really slow in preseason. He does not look like the Keenan Allen of old. But then they also went and spent the 9th overall pick on Rome Odunze this offseason. So how do you then balance this nature of Shane Waldron bringing, what is going to be a better passing attack to Chicago, but then also realizing there's more mouths to feed than Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet in this offense now?
Yeah, like I said, there's going to be slightly more pass attempts. The pass attempts are going to be, higher quality pass attempts. And when you look at Shane Waldron offense, he did not run 12 personnel a lot, right? He did not run 11 personnel a lot, excuse me. He was mainly in 12 personnel. He was mainly 2 wide receiver sets. If you're taking a wide receiver off the field, it's going to go back and forth probably mainly between Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen. More than likely, by the end of the season, it will mainly just be Keenan Allen coming off, which means DJ Moore is going to be out there every single snap. He is the alpha in this offense this season. I don't think that's questioned. So that's why I still have the confidence in DJ Moore. And like I said, even if the volume comes down a tad, if he sees 128 targets, which I think is easily within the realm of range of outcomes for him, he's still going to be a top 15 wide receiver, which is still outperforming his ADP. So, outside of injury, I just don't see a way where he's really faltering on his current ADP. And I see a lot of, ways that he could easily get close to repeating what we saw last season.
It's no question the Chicago Bears offense, is the Chicago Bears offense is going to be better this year, Ty. Chime in here on DJ Moore. Do you like him as a potential league winner this year?
I do, for the fact that he can be I don't want to say that he can be the Nico Collins for this Bears offense, or like he can be a Nico Collins type of player in fantasy this year, because last year, like, Nico Collins was the sleeper of all sleepers, right? But in that similar kind of role where he's going downfield more, big plays, maybe even a bit of a red zone guy, like Rome Odunze is a bigger body receiver, but friend of the show, Dave Kluge, has said, I think on a live stream with you, Lucas, DJ Moore is quarterback proof at this point. Like, yes, it was as bad as it got with Justin Fields, and look what it still resulted in. And now you get him a better quarterback and he's going to be on the field, like you had said, Cam, in these two wide receiver sets. DJ Moore is going to be the mainstay in this wide receiver room. So I think there is room for DJ Moore to, give you weekly top 10 finishes, just because this Chicago offense can be much better than it was last year. And for, his ADP, and you're looking at some of the other receivers going, kind of around that. I mean, why not take the shot on DJ Moore? Like, yeah, you might want to take some guys in better offenses in that range, but like DJ Moore, he might just be the most talented wide receiver in this range of wide receivers.
Which I don't think that's actually as outlandish of a thing to say as one might anticipate when they go look at who is going in this range. I think DJ Moore does absolutely have that kind of potential, that kind of upside this year. Ty, I'm going to come right back to you. Who is your first league winner this year?
My first league winner, Kenneth Walker. We have acknowledged Kenneth Walker in the past before, but just the question that we have to ask is, what if Kenneth Walker is actually just the complete package at running back? Because that's how everything has at least been presented to us this offseason out of Seattle, right? We all know how good Kenneth Walker is on the ground, right? In his 2 seasons in the league, he was second in missed tackles forced per touch last year. He's top 10 in 2 seasons in evaded tackles, top 15 in breakaway runs, carries, and opportunity share. And I think the reason why people aren't in, or as in on Ken Walker, I should say, is because of the snap share last year due to Zach Charbonnet's emergence and presence in the offense. Kenneth Walker was only 24th in snap share, but despite that, he still finished with over 1,000 total yards and 9 total touchdowns. And like I said at the very beginning, everything out of training camp, everything throughout this summer and offseason, preseason, has been that Ken Walker is going to be, or can be, a 3-down back in this offense. Like, it was first kind of reported and discussed by Albert Breer all the way back almost a month ago now at this point, where he said in his kind of training camp report from Seattle to the new staff, he looks like the kind of back you can play on all 3 downs and build a running game around. But this is probably the most pro Ken Walker thing you can say, and the most anti Zach Charbonnet thing you can say. And Zach Charbonnet gives the team some depth behind him. Yeah, that is some high praise for Kenneth Walker, that he's already separating himself that much all the way in late July, that Zach Charbonnet is a depth piece in this offense. And then about a week later, offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb said, and I quote, "He's a really, really talented, powerful back. That's a true 3-tool guy. He's electric out of the backfield as a pass catcher." Hello. We've never really thought of Ken Walker as a pass catcher. He hasn't topped 30 receptions in his career, but maybe there's some more opportunities for him this year in this Ryan Grubb offense. And then finally, head coach Mike McDonald said, every time we go over the roster, Kennedy Polamalu, who is the running backs coach in Seattle, says, let's feed this guy. He can be special. And this is your reminder that this is the same coach that was the running backs coach in Minnesota from 2017 to 2021 with Dalvin Cook, where he averaged 16.4, 13.8, 20.9, 24.1, and 15.9 fantasy points per game. That 20.9 fantasy points per game, by the way, was Dalvin's 3rd year, and that's what we're going into for Ken Walker. So there is such thing as training camp smoke that sometimes coaches do kind of lie through their teeth a little bit, but there is so much positive news and there's so much smoke that there's almost no way it isn't truth at this point. So Ken Walker is a nice target to target in these kind of middle rounds as some guy that can give you some league winning upside.
I think the other thing about the Seahawks too, they ran the fewest plays in the NFL last year. So we're worried about, like, if you're worried about snap shares with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, I mean, he's going to get more touches this year. They're going to be running more plays this year. I mean, there's just no two ways about it because Ryan Grubb is bringing a far more creative and dynamic offense to the Seattle Seahawks this year. Cameron, I'll let you chip in here with a few thoughts. What do you think about Ken Walker having a league-winning upside?
It just worries me a little bit because I want to believe that this is Kenneth Walker's backfield, but with where Charbonnet was taken, and I do understand, like, right, it's a new head coach, new offensive coordinator. You don't have the same loyalty to your picks, right? You don't like these guys aren't going to feel like, hey, we have to make sure Zach Charbonnet works out so we look good, kind of a thing, right? It's more we're going to put the best players on the field and win the game. However, I think Charbonnet is still a very talented back, and so that is where my worry comes from. However, I do think that Walker's trending in a way where I think he's going to finish better than I originally thought, because if he is, if he's catching more passes, right, if he can flirt with 45, 50 targets all of a sudden, right, then yeah, I think he has that top 10 upside because we know he's such a talented running back. We know, if this offense gets going, yeah, he could crack 10 or double-digit touchdowns this season. So I think he's got all the things there. For me, my worry is that is it actually going to come all together for Ken Walker, right? Are we buying into, like Ty says, too much of this smoke, or is it actually something that's going to be real? So I do see all the parts. I'm just a little worried that it's not all going to come together in the way that we hope for Ken Walker.
Which I think is the bear case on Ken Walker this year. Is there's still plenty of things that could go wrong, despite what the coaching staff is saying. Now, before we move on to my first player with league-winning upside, I've got to point out that there are 90% of you out there that are watching this video right now that are currently not subscribed to our YouTube channel. Ooh, I'm sorry. We're going to have to change that, all right? We're going to have to change that. Look, we're appreciative of all the hours you spent watching our videos, but if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. Turn on those notifications as well, so you know when our newest videos are up. To the 10% of you out there, thank you very much for watching our videos over at youtube.com/@thefantasyfootball. Fellas, if you need our podcast feed as well, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast from, just search Fantasy Football Fellas. You can find us over there. But to the 90% of you, hit that subscribe button real quick, like right now, before I dive into my first league-winning player, which is Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. Look, at this point, he's not going to get suspended this year. Okay. We're almost a week out from the season. We're not getting any news on his case at this point. He's going to be playing in 2024. And as much as people love the explosiveness of Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice has the most rapport built with Patrick Mahomes in this Chiefs wide receiver room. And a lot of people, when they talk about Rashee Rice, they look at this stretch from week 11 on last year, where he was averaging 17 fantasy points per game, which was good for the wide receiver 14. But you look at his metrics, this dude was phenomenal across the entire season in this offense. He was top 12 in all the following categories: targets per route run, yards per route run, first downs per route run, red zone targets, and yards after the catch. I mean, this dude was the focal point of the wide receiver room for the Kansas City Chiefs last year. And this was also on a Chiefs offense that was severely underperforming. I mean, they only scored 39 touchdowns last year compared to 55 in each of the previous 3 years. So should this offense return to scoring, right around 50 touchdowns again this year, Rashee Rice is going to be leading the charge in this wide receiver room. He's going to smash his wide receiver 33 price tag, especially when he finished as a wide receiver 27 overall last year. I mean, this is a guy where we're still not correcting to the reality that he's going to be playing in 2024. I don't care that the Chiefs went out and spent the 27th pick on Xavier Worthy in the draft this year. To be honest, they probably didn't think they were going to have Rashee Rice this year. I'd be willing to venture a guess if they knew they were going to have Rashee Rice this year, I don't know if they would have placed the same priority on Xavier Worthy. I don't know that for sure. That's I think within a world of realities, but to me, if Rashee Rice is on the field, he has the better chance for a higher catch percentage than Xavier Worthy. Maybe not as splashy of plays, but the fantasy points are going to come rolling in far more consistently for Rashee Rice than they are for a guy like Xavier Worthy, who's going to beat his guy downfield. They're going to leave Rashee Rice plenty of space over the middle to do some work. I love him at his wide receiver 33 price tag right now because this Chiefs offense is going to be good this year. Defense also took a little bit of a step back as well. I'll just throw that in there. But go ahead, give me your thoughts here. We'll start with Cameron. Rashee Rice, you like him as a league winner?
Yeah, he's right. He's the proven guy in this offense. He's the guy that's shown that he has chemistry with Patrick Mahomes. And if your argument is that it's too crowded now, in a down year for the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes was third in pass attempts last season. He threw the ball 600 times, okay, in a down year for this offense. So there's going to be enough targets to go around. He still had 27 passing touchdowns in a down year, like I said. So, right, if any of that goes up, if any of that improves, it's just going to be better for the team as a whole. Hollywood, like you said, he's already going to miss time. Xavier Worthy, already a rookie who, is going to be a little bit smaller. Odds are against him that he's going to figure it out right away. Not saying he can't, not saying he can't have, show that some of that Tank Dell magic that we saw Dell have last year. But the odds are Rashee Rice is going to be the clear wide receiver 1 for probably this entire season. Obviously, Travis Kelce's best pass catcher, but if he's a clear wide receiver 1 for Patrick Mahomes, and he's actually talented, right? He's not no offense. Like, I'm not trying to trash on MVS, but it did not quite work out when he was the wide receiver 1. But he is a talented player. So yeah, I at the wide receiver 33, if we know he's, we're 99% sure he's not going to get suspended, yeah, he's going to return on value, and he's probably going to just smash this ADP.
The best question we could possibly ask on this episode, Tyler, is Rashee Rice a good NFL wide receiver? What about you? Cameron's in on the idea. How about you? Can Rashee Rice be a league winner this year?
I think he absolutely can, just because I don't think it was a matter of anyone ever doubting like how good Rashee Rice can be in this Kansas City offense. It's just the idea that he could be suspended for X amount of games. I mean, it happened with Alvin Kamara last year, where people were so afraid of the suspension that you kind of forget that the situation, the player, the skill set, it doesn't really matter. Like, yeah, like you don't want to like overspend for a guy that's going to miss, a certain amount of games. But Rashee Rice, I just want to remind the people from week 12, right, when he kind of broke through as the lead receiver in Kansas City up until week 17. Then Rashee Rice was the wide receiver 12 in expected fantasy points per game. Like, and it was, he averaged 18.8, his expected fantasy points, 16.5. Like, for where you are getting Rashee Rice, no one can give you that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that like we can, we're going to get exactly what we got last year, because obviously if you bring in an Xavier Worthy and a Hollywood Brown, like it's going to be a little bit different this year for Rashee Rice. But at the same time, Rashee Rice has a pretty specific role in this Kansas City offense that neither Hollywood Brown nor Xavier Worthy nor even Travis Kelce can do like Rashee Rice. So I'm all the way in. I think you can honestly also make the argument too that like if you believe in this Kansas City offense, if you think they can bounce back from where they were last year, you should honestly be scooping up like any kind of Chiefs players you can, like Pacheco, Kelce, but especially Rashee Rice, just because he goes significantly later compared to those guys.
We're all in agreement. Rashee Rice at his current price tag will definitely be a league winner if all things go right for the Kansas City Chiefs this year, which once again, we are all in agreement. The Chiefs will have a bounce back season on offense this year. Cameron, I'll go ahead. You can kick us off for round 2 here. Who is your second player that you love with league winning upside this year?
Yeah, I'm gonna dive a little deeper. I guess a little more of the Rashee Rice range. Actually, Kenneth Walker is going a little earlier. He's going closer to where DJ Moore was. But it's Calvin Ridley, and he's going as wide receiver 38 right now after finishing as the wide receiver 18 last year. At the end of the 7th round, he was wide receiver 28 in points per game. So like, he's one of those guys that you hear wide receiver 18, you're like, oh, that's pretty good finish. Then you see wide receiver 28 points per game, and you're like, I don't know if that's quite as good. Still outperforming where his ADP was. He had 76 catches, 136 yards, 136 targets, 1,016 yards, and 8 touchdowns. I think by this point, we've done this podcast for like 4 years now. I would learn to label my stats because I read targets as yards every single time I read off stats, but I haven't figured that out yet. So we're all right. Last season, he was top 10 in air yards and deep targets and top 3 in red zone targets. And I know what you're thinking. You hear that? Like, I'm saying that stat and you're kind of like, well, he's on a new team, right? Is that really going to be something that's sticky? Well, back in 2021, he was number 1 in air yards and deep targets. This was his last full season. Number 1 in air yards and deep targets, and number 2 in red zone targets. That's just what he does. He runs deep routes and he gets open in the red zone. That's pretty good for fantasy football if you're going to see targets. And this team last year was throw it to D-Hop, run it with Derrick Henry, and that's all we do. And now, you bring in Calvin Ridley, you kind of revamp this offense. But D-Hop, he's battling an injury coming into camp. It sounds like he's might play week 1, might not play week 1, but he should be, ready to go at least, by the beginning, a couple weeks into the season at the very least. So he's going to be around, but we have to acknowledge D-Hop is pushing 34 right now. I think he's 34, 33, 34.
He is 32.
Is he? Thielen's 34. Thielen's 34.
Thielen's
That's what I was thinking. Yep. D-Hop is 32, pushing 33. And so, right, he's getting past his prime. He's already banged up coming into the season. Calvin Ridley was just paid wide receiver 1 money, the most money we've seen anyone paid as a free agent wide receiver since Christian Kirk. So there's a lot pointing to this team is going to utilize him. Last season, the Titans threw the ball the 3rd lowest amount, and they ran the 2nd least amount of plays. And so, I mean, obviously, if you're not throwing the ball and you're not really running many plays, there's a reason D-Hop's the only person, that's gonna see the ball. Cincinnati under Brian Callahan, who is their new coach, ran, was 24th in total plays, which isn't great, but they were 6th in passing plays last season. Do you know who their quarterback was for half the year? Jake Browning. It's not like he had Joe Burrow throwing to Jamar Chase the whole season. Nah, he was like, we throw the ball with this team. That's what we do. I throw the ball when I call plays. And he threw it the 6th most time, even with Jake Browning. And Browning, even if you're like, oh, well, maybe it changed, Burrow was like 1 or something. No, Browning was still top 6 in the last 12, his last 6 weeks that he was a starter. So this team's going to throw the ball more. Calvin Ridley is he is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I do believe in Will Levis. I know that's kind of controversial that a lot of people are out. I believe in him from a fantasy perspective, right? I believe in him from like the way you kind of started believing in Jameis Winston when he was starting for the Bucs, where this dude's going to launch the ball downfield. And they're going to kind of live and die by Will Levis. That's what they've built their team around. And so I don't know. I think Ridley, he's taken a year back. We've seen him be elite. Do I think he's going to be what he was in 2021? Absolutely not. I think we're far enough removed from that where to get back to that. But I think he can still be better than what we saw last year. And I think, the targets are just going to keep finding him. And at the wide receiver 38 price tag, yeah, I think he easily outbeats it. And if we see him take a step forward from last year, I think he can flirt with that top 15 finish this season.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point about believing in Will Levis because I'm not a fan of Will Levis, the quarterback, but the Jameis Winston comparison is perfect because I think if Will Levis is going to thrive as a fantasy asset, if he's going to find success as an NFL quarterback, it needs to come from a coach that's going to allow him to throw the football around the yard. It's not going to come from Tim Kelly and Brian Vrabel. They just want to shove the ball in Derrick Henry's gut. I mean, when you got Derrick Henry, you got to feed him the football. I mean, that's just the rule when you have a Yeti on your team. But I think with Brian Callahan in town now, you're going to see this team throwing so much more this year. You're going to see Will Levis finally get to sling the rock around the yard. It's not going to be pretty at all times. But when Calvin Ridley is streaking down the sideline, and he's going to come down with a few, 50, 60-yard touchdowns this year, which are going to be dynamite plays for your fantasy football team. Ty, I know you've been rising up on Calvin Ridley as well. Is there league-winning upside there for you?
I don't necessarily know if I would say league winning, but I definitely have a really good feeling that he's going to outproduce where he's going in drafts. And that definitely gives you an advantage to having a league winning team, right? So it's not necessarily just the player, right? But I think you get the advantage of a guy, again, outproducing where he's being drafted. And taking a look at his reception chart over in reception perception, it is, again, we've shouted Matt Harmon out in all of his work over there. The thing that kind of plagued Calvin Ridley last year was the fact that he was utilized very differently than he had been in the past in Atlanta, where, he was constantly moved around in the formation and in the offense at Atlanta. That didn't really happen in Jacksonville. And, his success didn't necessarily show up in box scores or on stat lines and stuff, but like he was still really good at getting open and stuff like that. So it wasn't that like Calvin really like took a step back or anything. I think the best way to say to explain like the ADP and where he goes, I think it's just people that are almost like overcorrecting, over punishing him for going to Tennessee and being with Will Levis. I think being in a system with Brian Callahan is going to, it cannot be stated enough how much good that will do for him. And so, yeah, like D-Hop aging too just opens the door for even more work for Calvin Ridley. I really think that Ridley can kind of establish himself as the most trusted receiver for Will Levis. And because of that, like, again, I wouldn't go as far to say Calvin Ridley himself is a league winner, but he's going to help you have a better chance of having a league winning team.
I do think if anything with DeAndre Hopkins lingers into the season, again, it sounds like he's going to be ready for week 1. And if he's not, he's going to be ready by week 2. But if anything does linger into the season, like if something happens week 3 and D-Hop is dealing with another injury, like I do think there is a world where Calvin Ridley just starts to dominate the target share in this offense and starts to get such a ridiculous target share, air yard share, everything in the sorts that he could just kind of volume his way and explosive play his way to being into a top 15, borderline top 12 guy. Like I don't think that's out of the world of possibilities, but I do think it is contingent on how long this injury for DeAndre Hopkins kind of riddles and plagues him throughout the season. But with that, fellas, let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be back with a handful of more league winners afterwards. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, where it is best ball summer. There are 5 core best ball tournaments to play in with over $20 million up for grabs this summer. You can even take a crack at winning the top prize of $1.5 million in their infamous Best Ball Mania 5 contest. To enter, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use the code FELLAS to get a first deposit bonus up to $250 and our 2024 draft guide for free. Again, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use code FELLAS to sign up. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit npcgambling.org. Alrighty, we are back. We have discussed 4 different league winners at this point. We've discussed DJ Moore, Kenneth Walker, Rashee Rice, and Calvin Ridley. Now, Tyler, I'll have you start off the final 2 players with league-winning upside here. And this is one where, again, I'm just going to say it on behalf of all of us, we're walking back this take here. And I will say, based on how his ADP has been adjusted in best ball drafts, I've been more of a fan of taking him at ADP, but in redraft leagues, when he was still going, right around that 2-3 turn, I still wasn't very optimistic about taking him there. But again, we're walking the take back. So Ty, who was your second player?
It's Josh Jacobs, the new running back for the Green Bay Packers. And I think I can say for all of us that we all knew that this was a possibility that Josh Jacobs could be a league winner because he's going into a new situation that seems very beneficial to really a running back of Josh Jacobs' skill set. We just kind of sided with a bit of the data when it comes to Green Bay offenses and running backs. But at this point, man, everything points to Josh Jacobs being locked and loaded for a 3-down bell cow workhorse role in this Green Bay offense. Like I said, we've discussed the history of Matt LaFleur using split backfields or using multiple backs, right? You've got Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, right? We talked about that history. And he's even said it in his own press conferences too, that he I shouldn't say prefers, but he doesn't mind utilizing multiple backs. But what if he was saying that because his lead back since 2019 and Aaron Jones was 20th percentile in height and only 33rd percentile in weight. Like he just didn't have the size to be a workhorse back like Josh Jacobs could be in this offense. And as a result of that, Aaron Jones only had one season with more than 220 carries. Yeah, he made up for it with receptions and stuff, but again, he was no workhorse back. And now we look at this year with Josh Jacobs in Green Bay. Right before we started recording this, it was reported that AJ Dillon is out for the year. Hope he can recover, because these neck injuries are not good news and they are not fun. Marshawn Lloyd, also the third-round rookie, doesn't sound like he's going to be much of a threat this year just because he missed a ton of training camp. And so he's going to have to kind of learn the offense on the fly. And we've seen that Matt LaFleur is not, he's not gracious when it comes to his opportunities for these young players. He would prefer them to kind of sit and learn the offense. So you're left with Josh Jacobs and a running back by the name of Emmanuel Wilson. So I'm sorry if Emmanuel Wilson and whatever we get out of Marshawn Lloyd are the reason why Josh Jacobs doesn't hit at least 300 touches this year. I just give up on all Green Bay Packers in fantasy football then, because it's truly unpredictable then. Like, it doesn't make sense with that kind of depth why Josh Jacobs can't be the guy in this offense. This team can literally run Jacobs into the ground and not be penalized for it because of the contract that he signed this offseason. So I really think, Josh Jacobs, as much as we acknowledged that it was a possibility, we thought it was unlikely. It seems very likely now. Matt LaFleur, when he was the offensive coordinator in Tennessee with Derrick Henry, and he was a workhorse, they were 7th in total rushing yards. And Josh Jacobs isn't Derrick Henry, but you know what Jacobs can do instead of Derrick Henry? He can catch the ball, right? So we are now kind of correcting our stance on this. We knew this was a possibility. Didn't really think it was likely, but everything points to this happening at this point.
Is there a running back out there in free agency right now that could foil any of this, or a potential running back? Like Samaje Perine has been the boogeyman literally all offseason for the Bengals, the Cowboys, for any team that's needing of a running back. I mean, the Packers now all of a sudden find themselves as being one of the most running back needy teams in the league, especially with Marshawn Lloyd not being completely healthy, which is, I think, a bigger concern than we may realize, and actually plays into this take a lot more maybe than you even gave off, Ty. Is there a running back out there that can come in and be like, you know what, he's going to be annoying enough where Josh Jacobs is going to continue to probably outperform his ADP, but won't become this league winner that he has the upside to be, a top 4 kind of guy?
I mean, the only guy that comes to mind is Kareem Hunt, but Cleveland didn't even trust him enough. They wanted Jerome Ford in the mix with Kareem Hunt last year. So outside of Kareem Hunt, there really isn't anybody.
Cameron, you're shaking your head as well. You don't think there's anybody?
No, it's the top free agent running backs right now: Dalvin Cook, Latavius Murray, Kareem Hunt, and Jerick McKinnon, and then Samaje Perine as well. And like, Perine's probably the best out of all of them, but Perine's not a guy that you're worried about coming in and taking 180 carries like we've seen from AJ Dillon the last couple seasons. And so that was the worry, is that Lloyd or Dillon were going to come in and take 45% of the snaps. We're going to steal some goal line work. There's not a guy out there right now who you're worried about them going, you know what, he might be better, in this situation, other than maybe a third down back in Samaje Perine than Josh Jacobs. But I think Jacobs is good enough of a back where even if you bring in like a Perine, he's going to have enough upside, working downs 1 through 2, that you're probably still getting a league winner if he's going to continue to go around that running back 12, 13 price range.
Yeah, so again, we're walking back this take. At the beginning of the offseason, we're looking at Marshawn Lloyd, third-round capital spent on him, AJ Dillon in his backfield to go along with Josh Jacobs, a history of this coaching staff. As much as we like Josh Jacobs, want to like Josh Jacobs, the math wasn't quite mathing there. But now that things have just totally fallen to Josh Jacobs' favor, I mean, it'd be silly for us to not sit here and say, yeah, Josh Jacobs could absolutely win you your league. He's going as the running back 12 right now. Absolutely a guy who has top 10 upside and easily, and I shouldn't say top 10 upside, that could easily finish as a top 10 back. And frankly, probably does have top 5 upside if he gets a bell cow share of the touches this year. I'll go ahead. I'll wrap us up with our last guy here, fellas. And I am going further down the board than you all. I am going the furthest down the board here. And I'm going to talk about a league-winning quarterback by the name of Jayden Daniels for the Washington Commanders. Rushing points are worth 3 times more than passing points at the quarterback position for fantasy football. Nearly 3 times more. And we all know Jayden Daniels can scoot with the football. I mean, over 2,700 rushing yards across his final 3 years in college. That's 900 yards a season. He had 1,100 in his final season at LSU. He is the only FBS player to throw for 300 yards and rush for 200 yards in the same game. So not only can this dude scoot, but he can throw the ball. He can toss the rock around the yard. And now I know the preseason hasn't gone as we've hoped. Cliff has been way too content in this horizontal rate and checking the ball down at one of the highest rates this preseason. But again, we go back to what we know, what is true about Jayden Daniels. We have seen him rush like crazy and not be afraid to chuck the ball downfield. Last season at LSU, this stat blew my mind. He was 53 of 79 on passes of 15 plus air yards down the field for a total of 1,783 yards, 24 touchdowns. Did you want to guess how many interceptions? 1. A singular interception. He had a deep ball completion rate of 67%. I mean, that is good. If you are a normal pocket passer, that is a phenomenal completion percentage across the season. This dude was completing 67% of his deep ball attempts last year. That led the nation. So you can get that potential at pick 104 overall in the back half of the 9th round in drafts right now. I mean, if we are talking about the definition of league winners, you open that in the dictionary, it's Jayden Daniels' face right in the middle of the page. As much as we all loved Anthony Richardson last year, I mean, Jayden Daniels is a more complete package at this point in his NFL career. So I want to say you two can agree with me because I like to think I made a pretty freaking good case there. But Cameron, I'll let you chime in here first. What's your level of confidence in Jayden Daniels being a league winner?
Yeah, especially going at the quarterback 12, right? I think it's going to come down to similar to Richardson of can he put the passing game together? Right. And he showed at LSU, right? He's more than capable to be a great passer, right? He led Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas to unbelievable seasons. I mean, it helps having those two on the outside as a college quarterback, similar to, Burrow having Chase and Jefferson. I do want to stop right after I say that. I'm not calling Malik Neighbors Chase and Jefferson. I'm just saying two top wide receivers in the country on the same team. Right, that was the comparison just before.
That was the point.
That one's taken out of context, but he's shown that he can throw it. And if he's a guy, whenever you have a quarterback, right, who's similar enough to like a Lamar, where I think if you're looking at like Richardson and Daniels, you're saying, okay, which one could push 1,000 yards more than likely? Daniels, to me, is the guy that would be more likely to push 1,000 yards. Richardson's probably the guy that's more likely to score 10 rushing touchdowns. Yeah. But if you're pushing 1,000 rushing yards in a season, I don't care how good your pass attack is, right? I mean, you're going to be a top 10 quarterback for sure. And if the passing comes together, if he's thrown for 3,700 yards, if he gets 20 plus touchdowns, we could easily see him pushing top 5 fantasy quarterback. And he's a guy we're talking about next year as one of, in the Lamar Jackson range.
Ty, what about you? What's your level of confidence? Because I think Cameron put the icing on the cake of what I was laying out.
No, he really did. I don't know really what else I can add other than, again, I'm back that.
Getting hot.
Other than just rushing quarterbacks are cheat codes, right? Like you look at the supporting cast, it's not the greatest, right? Like we all know that Terry is a very solid wide receiver. He's going to have Austin Eckler to throw to in the backfield as well. Brian Robinson is a decent running back. That's really it, right? Like Jayden Daniels is going to have to make something happen this year, and there is a very good chance that it's going to happen with his legs more than his arm.
I mean, you even look at Lamar Jackson's weapons in his 2019 MVP season. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Jayden Daniels is going to have an MVP season in his rookie year. I do not think that whatsoever. But the weapons that he's throwing to. I mean, can I just read off these wide receivers? I mean, sure, Marquise Brown. You got you should have Mark Andrews in here as well. There's Mark Andrews. I'm like, why can I not find Mark Andrews? But like the other wide receivers on this team, like we're talking about Willie Snead, we're talking Chris Moore, we're talking Seth Roberts, Miles Boykin, Jaleel Scott. Like we're naming dudes at that point. So yeah, you get Terry McLaurin there. And I mean, Zach Ertz may be, 70 years old at this point, but I mean, he's still, he's all reliable, it feels like. And, you figure it out. If you mix in Diami Brown, apparently Olamide Zacchaeus has been having a good camp. If Luke McCaffrey pans out, or really, what if they trade for Brandon Ayuk? What if that trade comes to fruition? And all of a sudden, Jayden Daniels is throwing to a tandem of Terry McLaurin and Brandon Ayuk in this offense. So I think there's just so many ways in which this can go right for Jayden Daniels. And one of two ways that it can go wrong is that he gets injured. The other way it goes wrong is that Cliff Kingsbury has just lost his mind and is completely incompetent. That's an offensive coordinator. But the upside that Jayden Daniel possesses, for me, far outweighs those two potential worlds where things could go wrong. But there you have it. Those are 6 league winners, 6 players with league winning upside in fantasy football this year. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Look, we'll be back tomorrow with 6 players on the opposite end of the spectrum that have league losing downside. We don't like bashing on players, but really it is a reality check of we might think we like these players, but actually the worst case scenario might be worse than the best case scenario. Which seems like a stupid, obvious statement, but you're following me. I know you all are following me out there. Maybe not the 90% of you, though, because you haven't subscribed. You haven't been around the block yet. But make sure you do that. YouTube.com/@thefantasyfootballfellas. I've been harping on the 90% too much today. Look, we're appreciative of all the support you all give us. Subscribe here on the YouTube channel or the podcast feed. You can follow our socials as well. FFFellas on Twitter. The FFFellas on Instagram. Fantasy Football Fellas, Facebook, and TikTok. I am at Lucas Wencl on Twitter. Camlaw FFF for Cameron. Tyler_Plath for Tyler. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Deuces.
Deuces.